Arwen Lysell had been waiting for this evening all week. The family dinners were not as common anymore. Her son Kaelin Varric and his wife, Selora Marin, often stayed busy with work, friends, or other plans. So, when Kaelin invited her for a proper dinner, she thought it would be special. Maybe a chance to feel included again, maybe a moment to laugh together like they once did. She dressed carefully that night. A simple blue dress, ironed smooth, her silver hair tied back neatly. She had even worn the old necklace her late husband once gave her, hoping it would make her look nice for the family she loved. Her heart felt light as she stepped into the dining room, seeing the long table filled with food, roast chicken, bowls of salad, bread fresh from the oven. Selora had done well. The room was alive with noise, the clinking of forks and spoons, the hum of voices rising together. Kaelin sat at the head of the table, proud, laughing loudly with his friends who had also been invited. Selora moved gracefully, making sure everyone had what they needed. And Arwen, she took a seat quietly at the side, folding her hands in her lap, smiling faintly as she watched. She didn't say much. She rarely did these days. She was just happy to be there. She thought being near her son, hearing his voice, was enough. But then it happened. Kaelin's laughter suddenly stopped. His eyes turned sharp, resting on his mother. For a moment, Arwen thought something was wrong. But then his words cut across the table like a blade. "Stop embarrassing us, Mom. Eat in the kitchen." The room froze. At first, Arwen thought she had misheard him. She looked at him, her heart tightening in her chest, waiting for him to smile and say it was a joke. But Kaelin's face was cold, his eyes steady, and there was no laughter in them. The silence was unbearable. Then one of the guests forced a chuckle. Another laughed nervously. Soon the room filled with the sound of soft, cruel laughter, as if everyone had agreed to make her shame louder. Arwen felt her throat tighten. Her hands shook on her lap. The heat rose to her cheeks, her vision blurred, but she did not argue. She did not shout back. She simply stood, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. Her knees trembled as she picked up her plate with unsteady fingers. Her food was untouched. She carried it carefully, her back bent slightly, her eyes fixed on the floor as she walked out of the dining room. Behind her, laughter returned. This time it was louder, lighter, as though the act of pushing her away had freed them all from a weight they never carried. The kitchen was dim compared to the bright dining room. The small round table stood near the window, its cloth old but clean. She placed her plate down, pulled the chair back, and lowered herself slowly into it. Her heart was still racing. For a long moment, she just sat there, staring at her food. Her fork slipped from her trembling hand and clattered onto the plate. She covered her mouth with her fingers, but the tears still fell silently, slipping down her wrinkled cheeks. She could hear them in the other room, the clinking of glasses, the cheerful voices, Kaelin's laugh. The same laugh she had once loved to hear when he was a boy running through their old house. She had given him her whole life. Worked double shifts when his father died, went hungry so he could eat, stayed up late sewing his school uniforms when they couldn't afford new ones. And tonight, her only son had told her she was an embarrassment. She picked up her fork again. The food was warm, but every bite felt cold. She forced it past the lump in her throat, chewing slowly, alone in the dim kitchen. Selora passed through once, carrying dishes to bring more food to the table. Their eyes met briefly. Selora hesitated, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something. But she didn't. She turned and walked back to the dining room, her steps quick, her face unreadable. Arwen lowered her gaze again, pretending not to notice. Minutes dragged on. The sound of laughter and conversation went on without her, the family dinner moving forward as if she did not exist. The kitchen clock ticked loudly, every second echoing in the hollow space of her heart. By the time she finished her plate, her appetite was gone. She placed her fork down and folded her hands on the table, staring at nothing. The night stretched long, but in that silence, one truth pressed down on her chest. She had never felt so small in her own son's home. When the guests finally left, she heard the front door close, the house settling back into quiet. She did not return to the dining room. She stayed in the kitchen, waiting until the lights went out one by one. Only then did she rise, clear her plate, and walk slowly to her small room. That night, she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her heart still ached, but her tears had dried. She thought of Kaelin, of the boy she had once held close, and she wondered, where had he gone? What had become of the son she had sacrificed her life for? She did not know yet, but the night of shame would not end as it had begun. By morning, the house would no longer feel the same. The house grew quiet after the dinner ended. The clinking of dishes stopped, the laughter faded, and the guests left with smiles that had not belonged to her. Arwen Lysell sat on the edge of her bed, still wearing the blue dress she had carefully chosen hours before. Her hands rested on her knees, but they wouldn't stop shaking. Her mind replayed the moment again and again. Kaelin Varrick's voice cutting across the table, the sharpness in his tone, the way everyone else had laughed after. The words hung inside her like a wound that wouldn't close. Eat in the kitchen. She pressed her fingers against her lips, as if doing so might block the memory from escaping her chest. But nothing stopped it. She felt it in every corner of her being. Arwen had known hardship all her life. When Kaelin's father died, she was left with nothing but a young boy to raise and a house that barely stayed warm in winter. She had worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to keep food on the table. She had skipped meals so her son could eat more. She had stayed awake through the night sewing holes in his clothes so he would not go to school ashamed. And she had done all of this quietly, never complaining, because she believed that one day Kaelin would grow into a man who would carry her with pride. But tonight, the man she raised had turned her into a shadow at her own family's table. She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. Her chest rose and fell slowly, but her mind would not rest. Every sound in the house seemed louder. The ticking clock in the hallway, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the muffled voices of Kaelin and Selora Marin speaking in their bedroom. At first, the voices were calm. But then she heard Kaelin laugh again, a careless laugh, as if the night's cruelty meant nothing. Selora's reply was softer, harder to hear, but Arwen caught her tone, serious, almost scolding. She knew then that Selora had noticed. Selora had seen her humiliation. For a brief second, Arwen's heart wanted to believe that maybe someone in the house cared. But she quickly brushed the thought aside. She did not want to hope. Hope had betrayed her too many times before. She rose and walked to the window. The streets outside were dark, the street lamps casting small pools of light on the empty road. The silence of the night pressed against her chest. She thought of the nights years ago when Kaelin was still a boy. She would wait by the window just like this, staying awake until he came home safe. She remembered how she used to whisper prayers into the dark for his protection, asking nothing for herself. Now, she stood at the same window, but this time the prayers refused to leave her lips. What was there to ask for? What good would it do? Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, tired eyes, silver hair, a face marked by years of sacrifice. She hardly recognized herself anymore. She wondered if Kaelin even remembered who she had been before age took her strength. Did he remember the nights she sat by his bedside when he was sick? Did he remember the times she worked her hands raw just to make sure he had books for school? Or had all of that vanished from his memory, leaving only the pride that made him push her away tonight? Arwen sat back down, her body heavy with sorrow. She wanted to cry, but her tears had dried into something harder, something like stone. She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She was only tired. So tired of giving her whole life and being treated like nothing in return. The hours dragged on. Midnight came. Then 1 o'clock. Then 2. She could still hear faint murmurs from Kaelin and Selora's room, though they grew quieter as the night wore on. Selora's voice had carried an edge earlier, something sharp that Kaelin had not laughed away. Arwen didn't know what was being said, but she felt it, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. She lay down finally, pulling the blanket to her chest. Sleep did not come. Her body ached, but her mind would not stop wandering. She thought of Kaelin's childhood again, the small moments she cherished, the laughter that once made her feel like all her sacrifice was worth it. How strange that the same laughter now cut her open. In the silence, she whispered into the darkness, "Maybe one day, you will understand." Her voice trembled, almost breaking. The night stretched long, endless, heavy. And though she did not know it yet, the weight of her silence was planting something in the house, something that would break by morning. Because while Arwen carried her pain quietly, someone else had not been able to ignore it. Selora Marin had seen everything, and her heart was no longer at peace. By dawn, the house would not be the same. The sun rose slowly, spilling pale light across the quiet house. Arwen Lysell had not slept much. She sat at the edge of her bed, still in her blue dress, her hands clasped together as if praying for strength. Her eyes were heavy, but her heart was awake, listening for every sound. For a while, all she heard was silence. Then suddenly, voices broke through the stillness. They came from Kaelin Varrick and Selora Marin's room. At first, they were muffled, but as the moments passed, they grew sharper. Selora, you're overreacting. Kaelin's voice carried through the walls, tight with frustration. No, Kaelin, I'm not. Selora's voice trembled, but it was steady. I saw what you did. I saw how you treated your mother. Arwen froze, her breath caught in her chest. She hadn't expected Selora to speak of it. She thought her daughter-in-law would stay quiet, like everyone else had at the dinner table. But Selora's words now were sharp, filled with something Arwen had not expected: anger, disappointment, and pain. You told her to eat in the kitchen, Selora continued. You let people laugh at her. Do you even hear yourself? Do you know what that looked like? Kaelin's tone hardened. She was embarrassing us, Selora. She doesn't know how to act around guests. Embarrassing us? Selora's voice broke. Do you hear what you're saying? That woman raised you. She gave you everything. And you humiliated her like she was nothing. The words struck through the air like thunder. Arwen pressed her hand against her mouth, her heart pounding. She had never heard Selora raise her voice before, not once. A sudden noise echoed, a suitcase being dragged across the floor. The sound was sharp, final. Arwen's body went cold. No, Selora. Stop. Where are you going? Kaelin's voice grew desperate now, no longer filled with pride. I can't stay here, Selora said firmly. I cannot live with a man who treats his own mother this way. If this is how you speak to her, how will you speak to me one day? The bedroom door burst open, and Selora appeared in the hallway, her suitcase rolling behind her. Her face was pale, her eyes red from tears, but her back was straight, her steps unshaken. Arwen stood in the doorway of her small room, clutching the frame for balance. Her eyes met Selora's. For a moment, time stopped. Selora's lips trembled, but her voice was clear. I'm sorry, Arwen. I should have spoken sooner. I should have defended you last night. But I cannot stay with him. Not after this. Kaelin rushed out after her, his hair uncombed, his shirt wrinkled from a restless night. His voice was no longer proud, no longer cold. It was desperate. Selora, please. Don't leave. I didn't mean it like that. Selora shook her head. You did mean it, Kaelin. That's the problem. She turned back to Arwen for one last moment. Her eyes softened. You deserve respect. And if he cannot give it to you, then he has already lost more than he knows. With that, she pulled her suitcase toward the front door. Kaelin reached for her arm, but she pulled away, her face set in quiet determination. Selora, his voice cracked, breaking into something Arwen had never heard from her son before: fear. Don't do this. Please. But Selora didn't stop. She opened the door, sunlight spilling into the house, and walked out. The door shut behind her with a sound that felt heavier than thunder. Kaelin stood frozen in the hallway, his face pale, his hands shaking. For once, he looked small. The proud man who had laughed so loudly the night before now stood in silence, powerless. Arwen stayed by her door, her heart breaking for them both. She had not wanted this. She had not wanted to be the reason their marriage fell apart. But deep inside, she knew it was not her fault. Kaelin had done this. His pride had done this. The house was painfully quiet again, but this silence was different from the night before. It was not filled with laughter or cruel jokes. It was filled with loss. Kaelin pressed his palms to his face, sinking onto the couch in the hallway. He sat there with his head bowed, his shoulders hunched, his whole body trembling. Arwen wanted to speak, but the words would not come. What could she say? Comfort him? Tell him it was all right? It wasn't. He had pushed her aside, and now life had pushed back. She stepped slowly back into her room, closing the door gently behind her. She sank onto her bed, her body heavy, her heart torn between sorrow and something else, something that felt like justice. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. Selora had seen her. Selora had spoken for her when she had no voice. And though the house now echoed with pain, Arwen knew a truth had finally been spoken. By morning's light, everything had changed. The morning after Selora Marin walked out, the house felt empty in a way Arwen Lysell had never known before. Not even the ticking clock seemed to want to break the silence. The walls that had once echoed with laughter now carried only the sound of footsteps, slow, heavy, restless. Kaelin Varric moved through the rooms like a man searching for something he had already lost. He called Selora's name again and again, dialing her number, leaving messages, but there was no reply. The confident son who had once spoken with authority now sounded like a boy abandoned in the dark. Arwen stayed in her small room, listening to the muffled sound of his voice through the thin walls. She did not intrude. She did not say, "I told you so." Instead, she sat in silence, her hands folded neatly in her lap, the weight of years pressing down on her shoulders. When she finally stepped into the kitchen, she found Kalen sitting at the table, his head in his hands. His shoulders slumped forward, his eyes red from a night without rest. In front of him sat his untouched breakfast. For the first time, he looked fragile. "Mom," his voice was soft, broken. He lifted his head, and Arwen saw something she hadn't seen in years: shame. His proud, arrogant eyes were clouded now, filled with guilt and regret. She stood across from him, her hands resting on the back of a chair, but she did not sit. She waited, her silence louder than any words. Kalen swallowed hard. His lips trembled, and for a moment, he looked like the little boy she had once held when he was sick, asking her not to leave his side. But that boy had grown into a man who had wounded her more deeply than she could ever describe. "I didn't mean it," he whispered finally. "Last night, I don't know why I said that. I was trying to, I don't know, make a joke, impress the others." His voice cracked. "But it was wrong. I was wrong." Arwen's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, but the words from last night still burned. She remembered the way he had looked at her, cold, without hesitation, as though she were nothing more than a burden. That memory was not so easy to erase. "You don't humiliate your mother to impress others," Arwen said quietly. Her voice was steady, even though her heart shook. "Respect is not a game, Kalen. It is the weight you carry for the people who gave you life. And once you drop it, you may never lift it again." Kalen lowered his gaze. He had no reply. His hands trembled on the table. For the next few days, the house lived under this silence. Kalen moved like a shadow, making calls, trying to reach Selora, but she did not answer. He sent messages, apologies, promises. Still, there was no reply. The rooms felt colder without her laughter, without her soft steps moving from room to room. Arwen watched her son break, but she did not rush to comfort him. She had comforted him all his life. This time, she knew he had to sit with the weight of his choices. Some lessons cannot be taught with gentle hands. Some must be carved by consequence. One morning, as the sun streamed through the curtains, Arwen sat at the kitchen table with her cup of tea. Kalen entered quietly. He didn't speak at first. He moved slowly, almost uncertain, carrying a second cup of tea. His hands shook slightly as he placed it in front of her. "Here," he said softly. It was a small gesture, almost nothing. But Arwen looked at the cup, and then at her son's face. His eyes were swollen, his pride stripped away. This was not the same man who had humiliated her at the dinner table. This was someone who had finally seen the cost of disrespect. Arwen took the cup but said nothing. She let the silence hold the weight. Days turned into weeks, and Kalen changed in small ways. He no longer laughed as he once did, loud and careless. His words carried hesitation now, as though each one had to be measured. He helped his mother with small tasks, things he had never noticed before. He walked slower, listened longer, spoke softer. But Arwen knew it wasn't just for her. It was because Selora had left, and the wound of her absence reminded him of his failure every single day. Arwen never gloated. She never reminded him of his mistake. She carried herself with the same quiet dignity she had held all her life. But in her heart, she knew something had shifted forever. Her son had been humbled. Whether Selora would return or not, Arwen could not say. That choice belonged to her daughter-in-law alone. But she knew one thing for certain. Kalen would never again forget the lesson his wife had carved into him. Respect is not demanded. It is given. And when taken for granted, it can cost more than a man is willing to lose. As Arwen sipped her tea, her eyes softened. She did not forgive fully, not yet. But she allowed herself a small hope, that maybe, just maybe, her son had finally begun to understand.